Hello, everyone. My name is Zahra Shirgholami. I'm a lecturer on modern slavery at the Wilberforce Institute. I'm delighted to welcome you to my webinar at the Wilberforce Business Academy. Today, I will present our recent research on modern slavery and labor exploitation risk for the hotel industry. So it's estimated that the UK's tourism and hospitality industries employ over 3 million people and have the highest concentration of migrant workers compared to other industries. We also found that the new employment model risks weakening workers' power in employment relationship, potentially leading to increased vulnerability and exploitation risk. So with that in mind, over the next 20-30 minutes, I will cover some of our key findings and discuss how the industry might overcome some of these risks. So I would like to just point out that my presentation is being recorded, but we will stop the recording when we come to the question at the end. During my presentation, you all are welcome to send your question by using the chat box at the bottom of the screen. I think there should be 10-15 minutes at the end of presentation to just go through these questions and have a group discussion. And if there is any question that we run out of time and I couldn't answer, you can reply. I can reply to those questions via email, and we will share the Wilberforce Institute email at the end of the presentation. So saying this, I would like to start. Can we go to next, please? So why we focus on hospitality sector? So one of the reasons, as I mentioned, the hospitality is the third largest employer in the UK. So it's got a high concentration of migrant workers and is dominated by casual short-term employment and involves many low-skilled works with low wages. Saying that, also legislation is evolving and there's more onus on companies to ensure due diligence in their operation and supply chains. Next slide, please. So what is the objective of for today? The first thing is give you some insight into our research on potential risk of modern slavery and labor exploitation faced by hotel chains. Second, we provide an overview of responses to labor exploitation and modern slavery in the tourism and hospitality sectors and how effective they have been. And thirdly, considering risk and opportunities of recent socioeconomic and political trends. And lastly, to answer any question you might have and have a group discussion. Next slide, please. So our research into hospitality sector, we did this research 2 years ago, and we did 23 interviews with professionals with experience or knowledge about the issues related to the research problem. For example, we interviewed hotel industry representatives, those supplying labor, hotel trade association organization, and representative of regulatory bodies and charities. We also did some document analysis. We analyzed 128 publicly available industry and policy documents, such as national statistics of modern slavery and other issues like labor exploitation, reviews of modern slavery risk and responses, guidance on a scope, definition, and causes of modern slavery, and also hotel companies' most recent modern slavery statement, which was around 70 statements at that time. Next slide, please. So our findings on hotel industry compliance with UK Modern Slavery Act showed that there is very limited compliance with UK Modern Slavery Act, which is in line with what other research has found. For example, Business and Human Rights Resource Centers found that they assessed 71 hotel companies' compliance with the Act, and they found that only 25% of hotel Companies meet minimum requirements, and 68% fail to disclose any information about risk in their operation and their supply chains. So this shows that like most large companies are underperforming regarding their legal obligation under Modern Slavery Act. The next slide, please. So our research, it's not surprising, but it shows that there is a high risk of modern slavery and labor exploitation within the industry. As from our findings, hotel chains appear at high risk due to their potentially vulnerable workforce. So they've got a complex supply chain, for example, the fragmented nature of franchising model that commonly used in the sectors, and also which creates kind of oversight challenges. Also, hotels are key suppliers or actors of sectors like construction, food, clothing, which are known to have high risk of modern slavery. And also, our finding also pointed out to power dynamics and enforcement problem in the sectors. For example, our findings showed the absence of a joint workforce, scarce opportunities to organize, and the low level of trade union in the sector, and kind of reported sentiment of fear among migrant workers because of the changes in between the immigration policies in the UK. So hotel chain business or ownership models appears highly fragmented, with sometimes hundreds of thousands of franchise employees, which limits the opportunity for workers to organize. The percentage of employees who were trade union members in the UK hospitality industry fell by 5% from 1995 to 2018. So in this context, approaches that are developed to address or detect issues within the sectors may purely be driven by employers, which encourage a tick box exercise without workers' involvement. So more collective representation, increasing worker voice could be a path to mitigate some of these risks. And also, as I mentioned, there's enforcement problem. An effective way to prevent exploitative practices and modern slavery practices is to ensure labor inspections are up to standards. However, several interviews felt that legislation is not adequately enforced in the UK. Public enforcement is under-resourced, heavily is under-resourced, and there is opportunity for workers to bring claim to an employment tribunal, but it involves many barriers, including a long waiting process. Like those employment tribunals are known to be very slow. And also it's so fragmented, and the relationship between employee and employer and employee is so blurred that even like it's not clear who is the employers and who is responsible for any breach of labor issues. So there is a need for increased scrutiny and fairness enforcement, which could provide opportunity to mitigate some of these risks. Next slide, please. So the other issues regarding the hotel industry to be a high-risk industry related to normalizing and moralizing possible exploitation, risk of normalization and moralization of exploitation, and also some macro and historical level issues. So regarding the first point, based on our findings, there's a risk for the industry that some exploitative practices continuing and being kind of tolerated by different stakeholders, including workers themselves, in the light of the UK hotel industry's historical track record of labor exploitations. For example, previous work has shown systemic underpayment, poor access to social protection like breaks, holidays, and sick pay, which seems to be or becoming a norm within the industry. So in 2019, the Director of Labor Market Enforcement reported that workers can sometimes work like machine in the industry. Based on our finding, practices like low pay and long hours can be depicted as future investment, kind of a path for promotion. For example, there's a narrative within the industry that you start as a kitchen porter and maybe 20 years later you become a general manager in a hotel. it could have been true in some cases in the past, but it's not really the reality of the industry. But that's a narrative that sometimes is being sold. And also, this being said, there's a shortage of staff in the industry, especially after Brexit, which can kind of create some competition in labor market supply, which could open some opportunities for better working conditions. And so the other issue is like, the issue is not just this, it's also a wider political and economic system, which is also responsible for pushing workers into precarious employment relationship, which needs to be reconsidered. Structural elements can potentially put people at risk. So as the findings show, regulatory non-compliance, complex supply chain, and socioeconomic political health threats all tends to increase workers' vulnerability. And also increased management and consumer awareness of equity and human rights could put this issue in a spotlight and could be a potential push and opportunity for appropriate intervention. So by saying this, I would like to share some of the direct quotes that from our interview with you. So next slide, please. So a representative from a charity described the industry, like the recruitment system in the industry, like this. One of the issues with recruitment in a lot of the hospitality job is that there are several layers to it. So it's not always somebody just going to an agency, signing up with an agency and getting a job. There are lots of sub-agents, and there is no regulation of that. So it shows the recruitment system, and then layers of kind of subcontracting, which could be very challenging. So next slide, please. So the other quote is from a consultant which used to work with hotel chain, and they mentioned that the sector has got itself into a very clever narrative, which says that the sector can offer great flexibility. So a high proportion of the workforce are on flexible hours, dictated by employers and not individuals. So it doesn't work and it's not flexible. And then they also mentioned that they've done some research that showed that chefs were working some just chronic hours, way beyond their set standards hours. But the company wasn't monitoring that those necessary. So it also shows that it's not about low skill jobs that they are in risk of exploitation. It's also about jobs like, for example, chefs has to work very long hours. So next slide, please. Also, a representative from a regulatory body mentioned the gig economy and the flexibility that employers not expect from their workers. And for many, it may offer some chance of flexibility, but for a lot, it wouldn't. And it would be difficult for them to have their rights upheld and having the confidence to articulate their rights and challenge those rights if they're not being upheld. Next slide, please. So with this being said, what are the key takeaways based on the interview that we've done and the stakeholder views? So UK has witnessed shifts in some labor practices over the last 4 decades. There has been rise in the gig economy, flexible employment such as self-employment and platform work, and zero-hour contracts. For example, zero-hour contracts includes 25% sub-hospitality workers, but whether or not its flexibility would benefit the employees is questionable, as employers often dictate those terms. Also, hotel chains increasingly distance themselves from their workers by subcontracting and casual employment forms. In this context, the employer-employee relationship is very blurred, and as well as the knowledge and understanding of how and where exploitation occurs. So also the regulatory frameworks, structural elements can potentially increase vulnerability. Also legislation, no matter how well designed, is nothing more than good intention on a page without adequate implementation and enforcement, which is an issue in the UK. So there is a need to rethink employment models and to rethink regulatory frameworks, especially to empower workers. So with this in mind, there are a few recommendations that we based on our findings. Next slide, please. So one of the recommendation is getting traceability on the supply chain and the recruitment practices of subcontractors. So there should be more resources also allocated to the public enforcement to conduct checks on service provider management system and practices. This could include the right to work, pay, hours, and also if there is like discrimination and whether or not employees like workers get benefit. They should also put in place whistleblowing a mechanism for workers to report concerns and grievances. As our findings showed, employment models may minimize workers' power to organize and uphold their rights. The rate of trade union has been very low in the industry. So such mechanism could at least give workers some voice, but ultimately employment models need changing to power workers, and that requires long-term economic transformation. And lastly, subcontracting shouldn't be allowed to transfer work to multiple subcontracted tiers to ensure visibility. As mentioned, the complexity and fragmented nature has blurred employer-employee relations, and it is not clear who is responsible for any breach of labor rights. So more transparency and more visibility could be a way forward for upholding labor rights. So these were the kind of key recommendations.